Millionaire left his pregnant wife after the diagnosis, but she recovered and took it all. Millions of dollars can buy luxury cars, sprawling mansions, and the illusion of a perfect life. But deep within those glittering facades often lie secrets so profound they threaten to shatter everything. This is the story of a marriage born in promise and drowned in betrayal, of a pregnant wife cast aside by the one person sworn to protect her. When a devastating medical diagnosis sealed her fate, her wealthy husband made the cruelest choice. Yet from the rubble of heartbreak, a phoenix rose. She not only survived, she thrived. Her journey is a testament to resilience, a reminder that real power starts with the soul. Henry Coleman was the sort of man who wore ambition like a custom-tailored suit. At 32, he had already accumulated more money than his entire extended family had seen in their lifetimes. Born and raised in the suburbs of Sacramento, California, Henry had an affinity for risk-taking from an early age. He traded baseball cards in middle school with a calculated vigilance, always seeking the rare gem that others overlooked. By the time he entered high school, he had moved on to day trading small stocks with money borrowed from his supportive parents, convincing them his budding passion would blossom into a lucrative future. What truly set him apart, however, was his charisma. Henry possessed a magnetic energy that made people gravitate toward him. At social gatherings, he dominated the room without effort, weaving stories of his business conquests into epic tales that left his audience spellbound. His confidence was alluring even to those who claimed to see through it. Perhaps it was this confidence that eventually led him to Fiona. They met at a charity gala in downtown Sacramento, an event raising funds for cancer research. Fiona Townsend, then simply Fiona Townsend, not yet Fiona Coleman, was a volunteer there. She'd been folding pamphlets and placing them neatly on every table before the guests arrived. Henry, wearing an impeccably tailored navy blue suit, noticed her right away. Though she was just a volunteer that night, something about her warm smile and the earnest way she spoke about the fundraiser made an impression on him. Fiona came from a far more modest background. She grew up in a small home on the outskirts of the city, worked part-time jobs through college, and spent most of her time contributing to various volunteer causes. She had a genuine soul, the type who'd stay up all night comforting a grieving friend, or sacrifice her own comfort if it meant bringing a little bit of joy to someone else. It was this heart, so full of compassion, that ensnared Henry's interest the moment he watched her carefully position ribbons and balloons, ensuring every table looked perfectly presentable. He introduced himself as a benefactor for the event. A conversation sparked first about the charity, then about life. Fiona felt an immediate sense of caution, recognizing Henry's well-practiced charm, but he seemed genuinely interested in her opinions on philanthropic endeavors. As the gala continued, he came back to talk to her at every opportunity. By the end of the night, he'd asked her to join him for coffee, promising he only wanted to continue their fascinating discussion. Fiona hesitated, but something in his eyes, a hint of sincerity, amid all that polished bravado, convinced her to say yes. Coffee became dinner, and dinner became another date. Soon, Fiona found herself stepping into Henry's world of lavish meals, exclusive clubs, and influential connections. She wasn't entirely comfortable there. Her middle-class upbringing felt starkly at odds with Henry's high-rolling lifestyle, but she appreciated how he seemed to treasure her. The philanthropic side of Henry's life also impressed her. He donated significant sums to various charities, including the Cancer Research Foundation, where they'd met. While it was true that Henry's generosity occasionally doubled as a business strategy, helping him network with the right people, Fiona observed moments of genuine empathy in him. Moments that gave her hope this outwardly ambitious mogul possessed a softer center. When Henry proposed 6 months later, it felt quick, Yet she couldn't deny the whirlwind romance they'd shared. He dropped to one knee at a local botanical garden, a place Fiona adored for its serenity. She accepted. In that instant, her life seemed like an improbable fairy tale. She was marrying a man who had the world at his fingertips, and he was willing to share that world with her. For her parents, who lived on the lower end of the socio-economic ladder, it was a dream come true to see their daughter secure such a brilliant, successful partner. Within a year, they were wed at a lavish ceremony in Napa Valley, attended by industry titans and politicians. Henry often rubbed shoulders with. People praised the union as a match of brains and beauty, and every camera seemed drawn to Henry's triumphant smile. More intimate snapshots, however, showed Fiona's quiet warmth and the unassuming joy that made her so unique. Though Henry soared in the professional sphere, closing deals and multiplying his fortune, Fiona remained grounded. She spent her time volunteering and, when she wasn't at a charity event, she accompanied Henry on business trips. She helped him connect with communities and philanthropic projects, balancing out what sometimes felt like an obsession with profit. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it worked, thanks largely to Fiona's unwavering patience and Henry's willingness, at least initially, to compromise. One crisp January morning, Fiona woke up feeling a wave of nausea that caught her off guard. Thinking it might be just a stomach bug, she tried to brush it off. However, as the days passed, she found herself increasingly fatigued, with an unusually heightened sense of smell. The faint aroma of coffee would suddenly overwhelm her, churning her stomach. Suspecting something more, she purchased a home pregnancy test from a discreet pharmacy across town. While she and Henry had talked about having children someday, Fiona wasn't certain if this was the right time. She felt a flutter of excitement, but also worry about Henry's reaction. He was in the middle of a groundbreaking venture, something about a tech platform that would revolutionize financial analysis and working 14-hour days to ensure its success. The moment Fiona saw the positive lines, her heart pounded with a mix of joy and fear. She recalled how Henry sometimes spoke about fatherhood in hypothetical terms, always couched in disclaimers like "once everything settles down" or "when I've reached my next financial goal." Regardless, Fiona felt a surge of warmth bloom inside her. She was going to be a mother, an unplanned but, to her, welcome surprise. That evening, she decided to create the perfect atmosphere to share the news. She prepared Henry's favorite meal, roasted salmon in lemon butter sauce, and lit candles in their elegant dining room. She even dressed in a simple but elegant gown she knew he admired. Her plan was to reveal the pregnancy test result after dessert. However, Henry arrived home late, exhausted and visibly irritated. He dropped his briefcase on the marble floor with a thud, heading straight for a glass of whiskey at the bar. Though he forced a smile when he saw her preparations, the tension in his posture was undeniable. "I'm sorry," he muttered, loosening his tie. Investor meeting ran over, and then traffic was a nightmare. Undeterred, Fiona asked him to join her at the dining table. She tried to keep the meal warm in the oven, but some dishes had grown cold. Henry tried to look appreciative, but his gaze kept drifting to his phone. Sensing his distraction, Fiona decided to expedite her plan. She handed him a small velvet pouch after they finished eating. "Open it," she whispered, heart pounding. Henry pulled out the home pregnancy test, eyes widening in realization. "Are you serious?" he asked, voice tight. She nodded, tears of joy gathering in her eyes. "Yes, Henry, we're going to have a baby." For a flicker of a moment, she saw wonder in his expression, but as quickly as it came, it vanished, replaced by apprehension, almost dread. "That's wow," he said, forcing a half-hearted smile. "That's big news. It's just not the best timing." The words stung Fiona, though she tried not to let it show. "I know it's sudden, she conceded, but we talked about this someday. Maybe this is just earlier than expected. Henry gulped his whiskey. I need some time to process this, Fiona. My plate is already overflowing with work. That night he was distant. Fiona lay awake in bed, one hand over her stomach, wondering if Henry would truly come around. By the next morning he was gone before she woke, leaving a terse note, had an early flight to New York. We'll talk when I get back. Fiona swallowed her disappointment and tried to keep the spark of joy alive. Henry was ambitious, yes, but she hoped he would embrace fatherhood once he grasped the gravity of bringing new life into the world. Little did she know how deeply his fears and drive would begin to erode the foundation of their marriage. Henry's flight to New York was filled with conflicting thoughts and mounting pressures. He was on the verge of sealing a deal with an investment firm that could catapult his company into a new stratosphere of wealth. Yet the news that Fiona was pregnant had thrown him into emotional chaos. Once in Manhattan, he plunged into meetings. The city's towering skyscrapers and frenetic pace mirrored his internal state. During brief moments between negotiations, his mind wandered to thoughts of fatherhood images of cradling an infant, rearranging his schedule for pediatric appointments. The visions both excited and terrified him. Was he ready for this? Back in Sacramento, Fiona scheduled a doctor's appointment with Dr. Samantha Lee, the OB-GYN at Cedars-Sinai, whom she and Henry had donated to in previous philanthropic drives. Fiona arrived early, a bundle of nerves. After some tests and an ultrasound, Dr. Lee confirmed she was around 8 weeks along. The doctor's gentle reassurance drew tears of relief from Fiona's eyes. But the appointment came with a twist. Dr. Lee noted some irregularities in Fiona's liver enzymes, nothing critical yet, but worth monitoring. Pregnancy can put extra stress on the body, Dr. Lee explained. We'll run more tests to rule out any underlying condition. Fiona tried not to panic. She told herself it was likely just normal pregnancy-related changes. Still, a small knot of anxiety lodged in her chest. A week passed before Henry returned from New York, triumphant in his negotiations. He breezed through the door, briefcase in hand, his grin fading when he saw Fiona's apprehensive expression. She explained the medical findings. Dr. Lee is concerned I might have an autoimmune issue. I need more tests, Henry. He frowned, sinking into the sofa. Autoimmune issues, what does that mean? It could complicate the pregnancy, she replied, voice trembling. Doctor, Lee wants me to see a specialist. Henry's shoulders tensed. Look, whatever you need, we'll do it. But are we sure now's the best time for this? I mean, if it's dangerous. Fiona's heart clenched at the implication he might be hinting at. She hadn't even considered terminating the pregnancy. This baby is part of us, she managed, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. I'm not giving up, he sighed, nodding. Right. Fine, I just need to think. That night, Henry tossed and turned, consumed by guilt and fear. Fiona felt more alone than ever, clinging to the hope that he'd come around. But as the weeks passed, his business demands only intensified, and his emotional distance grew. Fiona was left to navigate a precarious health challenge with minimal support from the one person whose presence she needed most. Fiona's appointment with the specialist doctor, Christopher Brown, marked the start of a new reality. Dr. Brown was a respected maternal fetal medicine expert in his early 50s. Tall and calm, he carried a reputation for guiding high-risk pregnancies with compassionate expertise. He reviewed Fiona's records, asked detailed questions, and recommended a series of tests. It appears your immune system might be producing certain antibodies that could affect your organs and the baby's development, he said gently. We'll monitor closely, and there are medications that can help, but it's crucial you follow up often. His words landed with sobering weight. Fiona tried to quell her mounting anxiety. What about stress, she asked, Recalling Dr. Lee's warning, Dr. Brown offered a sad smile. Stress can exacerbate autoimmune disorders. Try to keep calm, rest, and get emotional support. Fiona thought of Henry's incessant absences, the tension in their once happy home. She forced a nod, promising to do her best. In the following weeks, she submerged herself in medical appointments and quiet self-care. She took gentle walks, practiced prenatal yoga, and prepared healthy meals that might bolster her immune system. Friends from her volunteer circles rallied around, providing rides to the hospital whenever Henry was unavailable. Meanwhile, Henry found himself more immersed in his business empire than ever before. The success of his latest deal led to more partnerships, each demanding a piece of him. Between flights and meetings, his moments at home were fleeting, and even then, he seemed preoccupied. One night, Fiona laid out her latest ultrasound images on the kitchen table, hoping to spark some fatherly excitement. Henry barely glanced at them before muttering something about an urgent email. As her pregnancy advanced, Fiona sensed a gaping chasm opening between them. Henry's polite responses and occasional apologies didn't soften the feeling of abandonment she felt, especially as her health remained in delicate balance. One weekend, he returned from a trip to Dallas, particularly agitated, ranting about investor demands. Fiona tried to comfort him, but he shrugged her off with a dismissive, "I just need some space." That brief exchange rattled Fiona. She realized Henry was slipping away, possibly seeking an escape from the emotionally fraught atmosphere at home. The once glamorous life they shared now seemed more like a performance, with Fiona cast in the role of a lonely spectator and Henry the ever-distant star. Fiona woke one morning to find Henry already gone. This was not unusual, but it still stung. His typical note was replaced by a curt text called Redwood Financial about some documents. "They'll need your signature." Confused, she poured herself a cup of herbal tea and tried to distract herself from the wave of nausea returning with the pregnancy's progress. Later that afternoon, a call came in from Redwood Financial. A polite woman named Michelle explained that Henry had set up a trust arrangement. Fiona was to sign several legal documents that would finalize the transfer of certain assets. Fiona, taken aback, asked that the documents be emailed so she could review them. She opened the file on her laptop, only to be confronted by reams of dense legal language, references to an irrevocable trust, clauses limiting beneficiary rights, and fine print disclaimers. She left a message for Henry, asking for clarity, but received only a generic text in reply, "Busy. Will explain later." Alarmed, Fiona reached out to an old college friend, Mark Johnson, now an attorney. After scanning the documents, Mark's tone darkened. "It looks like Henry is compartmentalizing significant assets into a trust you won't have ready access to. If something goes wrong like a divorce, you could be cut off from these funds." Fiona felt a sharp pang of betrayal, tears filling her eyes. Why would he do that now? Mark cleared his throat gently. "Could be standard estate planning, could also be more. You need to be cautious." That evening, Fiona confronted Henry in their living room, documents in hand. "I got a call from Redwood Financial. What's this about a trust that excludes me?" Henry, exhausted from back-to-back meetings, bristled at the accusation. "It's just business, Fiona," he said, face tight. "I have investors. I need to protect certain assets." "Protect from whom?" Fiona asked, her voice trembling. "From me?" He looked away. "It's not personal. My legal team advised me to set this up to shield funds. It's best for the company." "It's best for you," Fiona fired back. "I'm your wife, Henry. I'm pregnant and sick. You didn't even talk to me before doing this?" He grimaced, an undercurrent of guilt slipping through his irritation. "I'm sorry. Things are complicated. Let's not blow this out of proportion." But it was too late. The trust documents stood as damning evidence of Henry's commitment to his empire above all else. Fiona walked away, clutching the pages, her mind swirling with a dread she could no longer ignore. Over the following weeks, Fiona threw herself into managing her health. Dr. Brown's regimen of medications and frequent checkups began stabilizing some of her concerning symptoms. She also attempted to keep her stress under control, though the situation with Henry weighed heavily on her heart. She sought solace in the small victories of pregnancy, the fluttery sensation of the baby kicking, the improvement in her lab results, the unwavering support from friends. Angela White, in particular, proved a steadfast ally, picking Fiona up for doctor's appointments whenever Henry was unavailable, an increasingly common occurrence. Henry, meanwhile, rented a sleek penthouse apartment downtown, initially framing it as a temporary crash pad for overnight business stays. But days turned into a week, and he barely returned to their home. Their once shared mansion, filled with polished floors and designer furniture, became a silent stage on which Fiona battled her anxieties alone. The loneliness became intolerable one afternoon when she received a call from Redwood Financial again. They demanded her signature on additional documents related to shifting assets. This time, Fiona refused and told them she wanted her own lawyer's review first. She sensed the momentum of Henry's strategy. He was insulating himself financially, apparently preparing for a worst-case scenario. Her suspicions confirmed, Fiona dialed Mark Johnson. "I won't sign anything," she said, her voice quivering. "I want to protect myself and my child. Henry's barely around. I'm scared he's leaving me for good." Mark listened patiently, advising her to document everything and ensure she didn't lose her rightful share of assets. Fiona appreciated his calm professionalism, but the emotional toll pressed heavily on her. She lay awake at night, one hand on her growing belly, trying to quell the fear of raising a child alone while also battling health complications. One day, after yet another lonely prenatal class, she found Henry waiting at the house. He'd come to collect more of his belongings, or so he said. She confronted him in the foyer, fighting tears. "Henry, can we please talk?" she pleaded. "Are you moving out for good?" He avoided her gaze, shifting uncomfortably. "I'm not abandoning you, Fiona. I just need space. My work, my stress. I can't focus with all this, she repeated, heart twisting. "You mean me, my illness, our child?" he exhaled, looking momentarily pained. "That's not fair. You know it's more complicated than that." Fiona pressed a hand to her abdomen, feeling the baby move as if in protest. "I'm fighting to keep myself and our baby healthy, Henry. But you're busy insulating yourself from us financially. That's the reality." Henry said nothing, merely gathered his suitcases and left. The shutting of the front door resonated through the cavernous hall, echoing the finality of his departure. Fiona sank onto a nearby chair, tears slipping down her cheeks as the baby shifted inside her, a poignant reminder she was no longer just fighting for herself. Henry's new penthouse offered a panoramic view of Sacramento, an ambitious businessman's dream. But no matter how impressive the skyline, guilt gnawed at him. He told himself he was doing this for everyone's benefit. Fiona needed a calm environment, he reasoned. Yet a part of him knew the truth. He was running from emotional responsibility. Work devoured his days. His tech platform was on the verge of a major launch, and every detail demanded his attention. He told himself he'd make it up to Fiona once the chaos subsided, once he secured the biggest success of his career. Yet nights in the penthouse felt hollow. He slept fitfully, haunted by the memory of Fiona's tear-streaked face. Back at the mansion, Fiona found her days long and exhausting. Her autoimmune condition flared unpredictably, causing bouts of pain and nausea. She relied heavily on Dr. Brown's treatments and Angela's steadfast kindness. Though physically drained, her spirit remained unexpectedly resilient. Late one evening, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Answering cautiously, she heard a warm, familiar voice. "Fiona? It's Angela. I'm at the hospital. You need to get down here." Alarm coursed through her. "Hospital? What's wrong?" "It's Henry," Angela said quietly. "He collapsed at a meeting. They think it's sheer exhaustion or stress, but I figured you should know." Despite everything, Fiona's heart lurched with concern. She threw on a jacket and rushed to the hospital. Angela met her in the waiting area, her face drawn with worry. "Where is he?" Fiona asked, breathless. Angela pointed down the hall. "He's stable now, but they're doing tests. They said it's stress-related. He's been pushing himself too hard." Fiona felt an odd mixture of sympathy and frustration. She approached Henry's room cautiously. He lay in the hospital bed, eyes closed, and the fourth drip ran into his arm, and his phone, ever present, rested on the bedside table. When he sensed her presence, his eyes flickered open, and a wave of embarrassment crossed his features. "What are you doing here?" he asked softly, clearing his throat. She swallowed. "Angela called me. I came because Henry, you're still my husband." He laughed bitterly. "Some husband I've been." They stared at each other in tense silence. Eventually, Henry looked away. "Doctor says I've got dangerously high blood pressure." Ironic, isn't it? I'm the one always preaching self-control, and now I can't even control my own stress. Fiona edged closer to the bed, arms folded protectively over her belly. "This can't keep going on. We're destroying ourselves, Henry." He nodded weakly, pain etched into the lines on his face. "I know." But even in that moment of vulnerability, Fiona sensed a wall between them. He was still that driven businessman, clinging to the remnants of control. She could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes, as though he was already figuring out how to spin this setback into a win. When the doctor allowed Henry to be discharged, Fiona offered him a ride home. He declined, insisting he had a car service waiting. She watched him leave the hospital lobby, shoulders slumped. Sadness washed over her. Their marriage felt like a frayed tapestry, threads unraveling from all sides. As she made her way back to her car, she pressed a hand to her abdomen. The baby kicked, and she closed her eyes, whispering a silent vow. "No matter what happens with Henry, I'll protect you." For the first time, she acknowledged the possibility that she might have to raise her child alone. The next few weeks brought a series of jolts to Fiona's already delicate state. Her autoimmune symptoms intensified, leading to unpredictable bouts of fever and fatigue. Dr. Brown tweaked her medication, cautioning her yet again about the dangers of stress. One rainy afternoon, Fiona sat in her living room, flipping through medical bills and insurance forms. She hated feeling powerless, yet that was the exact state she found herself in, dependent on Henry's money, Henry's decisions, Henry's fleeting moments of concern. Just as she felt her resolve slipping, the doorbell rang. It was Mark Johnson, his expression guarded. He held a folder under his arm. "Fiona, I've been looking deeper into Henry's financial moves. You need to see this." She ushered him inside, heart pounding. They sat in the living room as Mark explained what he'd discovered. Henry had been transferring large sums of money into offshore accounts for the past few months. The trust arrangement was only part of a larger plan to insulate his assets. "He's moving his money out of reach," Mark said gently. "If he decides to walk away, you could be left with far less than you think." Fiona's eyes brimmed with tears of betrayal. She gazed around the lavish mansion, now revealed as a fragile facade. "So I'm basically facing the prospect of him abandoning me financially and emotionally while I'm pregnant and dealing with a serious health condition." Mark placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I won't let that happen. We can file certain claims or even a legal separation to protect you and the baby. But you need to decide how far you want to go." Fiona stared at the folder in her lap, feeling a swell of anger. This was her life, a life she had built with Henry, under the assumption that love and partnership meant support, not abandonment. She clenched her jaw. Do whatever it takes to secure what my child and I need. I won't let him hang us out to dry. Mark nodded, rising to leave. I'll prepare the paperwork. Call me when you're ready. After he left, Fiona sank into the couch, heart throbbing with a mingled sense of loss and determination. Her phone buzzed. It was Henry, texting to say he'd be out of town for business again. She almost laughed at the dark irony. He'd left her to fend for herself, all the while siphoning off the wealth he claimed was theirs. She curled a hand around her belly, feeling the baby move. We'll be okay, she whispered, voice trembling. I'll fight for you with everything I have. That night, Angela stopped by with groceries and a hug, just as the tears began to overwhelm Fiona. They sat in the kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the only sound between them for a while. I can't believe he's doing this, Fiona said shakily. How did we get here? Angela squeezed her hand. Sometimes people reveal who they truly are under pressure. You need to focus on getting through your pregnancy and protecting your future. Henry's made his choices, Fiona nodded, steeling herself. She might have once been the sweet volunteer with a heart full of trust, but life had forced her to adapt. She wasn't just a victim, she was a mother to be with a responsibility to survive, even if it meant going to war with the man she once loved more than life itself. As Henry's offshore dealings deepened, fate delivered a curveball that rattled his empire. The ambitious tech platform he'd been developing faltered during its beta launch. Investors grew skittish. Stock valuations seesawed. Henry spent sleepless nights firefighting PR disasters while scrambling to patch the platform's technical flaws. The mounting stress took a visible toll. Dark circles ringed Henry's eyes, and his shoulders sagged beneath the weight of looming deadlines and potential lawsuits. He avoided Fiona entirely, convinced his presence would only heighten both their anxieties. Instead, he poured every ounce of energy into salvaging his company's crown jewel. Fiona, however, had her own crisis to face. One afternoon, she collapsed at home, seized by sharp abdominal pains and dizziness. Angela rushed over, finding Fiona pale and barely conscious. An ambulance sped Fiona to the hospital, where Dr. Brown discovered her blood pressure had skyrocketed dangerously. Henry, alerted by a frantic text from Angela, appeared at the hospital a few hours later, visibly shaken. He found Fiona in a private room, hooked to the fourth drips and monitors. She looked fragile, her once lively eyes dulled by pain. "I'm sorry," he whispered, approaching her bed. "I came as soon as I could." Fiona managed a faint nod, though she couldn't muster much energy to speak. Angela stood by her side, arms crossed, her glare conveying a silent admonishment to Henry. Dr. Brown arrived moments later, explaining that while they'd stabilized Fiona for now, her condition remained precarious. Stress, he emphasized again, was a significant threat to her and the baby. Henry sank into a chair, staring at the medical equipment. Guilt gnawed at him. As he looked at Fiona's wan complexion, he realized how close he was to losing everything that truly mattered. The ambition, the deals, the offshore accounts, none of it felt meaningful if it meant endangering the life of his wife and unborn child. He stayed at her bedside that night, phone switched off for the first time in ages. The hospital's fluorescent lights reflected off the antiseptic floors, casting sterile shadows across Fiona's face. She dozed in fitful spurts, occasionally waking to glance at Henry before drifting off again. By morning, Dr. Brown announced that Fiona was stable but recommended a longer hospital stay. Henry stepped into the corridor to take a call from his coup, who delivered grim news about potential investor lawsuits. For once, Henry couldn't muster any reaction. The only lawsuit that mattered was the one he waged against fate. desperately trying to keep Fiona and their baby alive. When he returned to Fiona's room, she gave him a weak, sad smile. "Go," she whispered. "Handle your crisis." He shook his head. "No, I'm staying. I can't keep running." But as the day wore on, his phone buzzed non-stop with urgent messages. Fiona saw him pacing in the hallway, torn between two worlds. In the end, she closed her eyes, letting the steady beep of the heart monitor lull her into a restless sleep. She couldn't force Henry to be the husband she needed. He had to choose that path himself. A few days later, Fiona was discharged from the hospital with strict orders for bed rest and minimal stress. Henry pleaded with her to come to his penthouse, arguing it was closer to the hospital and that he could arrange private nursing care there. Exhausted and eager for peace, she agreed. The penthouse was pristine and modern, a testament to Henry's taste for sleek lines and cutting-edge technology. A private nurse named Lily Smith greeted Fiona warmly, helping her to a spacious guest bedroom. Despite the luxurious surroundings, the atmosphere felt more clinical than cozy. Henry attempted to be more present. He rescheduled meetings to work from home, frequently checking in on Fiona's vitals. But the tension between them remained. Their once intimate conversations had turned polite and perfunctory. Fiona felt like a guest in Henry's domain rather than a partner in his life. One night, restless on the plush penthouse couch, Fiona heard Henry on a phone call in the adjacent room. She caught snippets of phrases like offshore assets and trust limitations. Her stomach twisted. Even now, amidst her fragile state, Henry continued to orchestrate his financial safety net. But fate wouldn't wait for them to figure things out. Early the next morning, Fiona jolted awake with excruciating abdominal pains. She gasped, struggling to breathe. Lily rushed in, checking Fiona's blood pressure. It was dangerously high again. An ambulance was summoned. Henry stumbled out of his room, disoriented, and followed in a daze as they whisked Fiona to the hospital. In the frantic blur that followed, Dr. Brown delivered grim news. The baby was showing signs of distress, and Fiona's body was nearing a breaking point. They had little choice but to perform an emergency C-section to save both mother and child. Henry stood outside the operating room, numb with panic. Memories of lavish galas and triumphant boardroom deals flashed through his mind, now rendered meaningless compared to the life or death stakes playing out behind those double doors. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Brown emerged. "You have a daughter," he said, offering a reassuring nod. "She's premature but stable. We'll keep her in the NICU for close observation. Fiona's lost a lot of blood, but we've stabilized her as well. She's in recovery." Relief collided with guilt in Henry's chest, tears burning his eyes. A father. He was a father now, yet he couldn't quell the dread that his own choices had contributed to this harrowing ordeal. When he was finally allowed to see Fiona, she lay pale and exhausted, a tangle of tubes and monitors surrounding her bed. "Henry," she rasped, her eyes fluttering open. "The baby, is she okay?" He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "She's in the NICU, but Dr. Brown says she'll be fine." Tears formed in Fiona's eyes, and he gently took her hand, squeezing it. In that moment, he realized how close he'd come to losing them both. No empire, no offshore account, no ambition could ever replace the miracle fighting for life in the NICU, or the woman lying in this hospital bed. He stayed by Fiona's side, phone off, as the hours slid into night. At some point, exhaustion claimed her, and he sat watching the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest. A man with wealth beyond most imaginations, he had never felt more vulnerable. But in that vulnerability lay the beginning of what could be genuine change if he had the courage to follow through. In the weeks after Grace's dramatic birth, Fiona remained in the hospital to recover, while their newborn daughter fought to gain strength in the NICU. Henry spent his days shuttling between the two, splitting his time between Grace's incubator and Fiona's recovery room. The hospital became their temporary home, stripping away any veneer of high society and luxury. Money meant little in the face of medical uncertainties. Henry found himself enthralled by Grace's delicate features each time he peeked into her incubator. She was tiny, hooked to monitors and tubes, but each day brought small improvements an ounce gained, a slight increase in stable breathing. He asked endless questions of the NICU nurses, determined to understand every aspect of her care. To his own surprise, the thrill of fatherhood overshadowed his once consuming hunger for business conquests. Fiona's healing process was slow but steady. Physically drained and emotionally exhausted, she spent hours asleep, awakened periodically by doctors checking vitals. Whenever she was lucid, Henry stayed close, updating her on Grace's progress. Occasionally, she'd see a tenderness in his eyes that reminded her of the man she first fell in love with. Still, the scars of betrayal lay fresh. She couldn't simply forget how he'd abandoned her in the darkest months of her pregnancy. Angela and Mark visited regularly, bringing care packages and unwavering moral support. Mark gently reminded Fiona to keep certain legal protections in mind, though he respected her need to focus on recovering rather than diving into another battle with Henry. In unguarded moments, Fiona wondered if Henry's shift in behavior was genuine or simply an emotional reflex to the crisis they'd endured. After nearly a month, Grace improved enough to be discharged, though she required close outpatient monitoring. Fiona, also stabilized, left the hospital around the same time. Henry arranged for them to stay at the penthouse, citing easy access to top-tier medical facilities. He even hired a private pediatric nurse to assist with Grace's specialized care. Those early days at home were chaotic and magical in equal measure. Grace cried at all hours, but the moments of holding her close, rocking her, feeling her tiny fingers curl around theirs, melted Fiona's heart. For the first time, Henry seemed fully present, cooking simple meals, running errands, and waking in the middle of the night to soothe Grace when she fussed. Yet, for all his efforts, Fiona struggled to let her guard down. She wasn't sure how to reconcile the attentive father Henry was becoming with the calculating businessman who had siphoned assets offshore. One evening, as she rocked Grace to sleep, Henry approached quietly. "I've missed so much," he whispered, gazing at Grace with awe. "I don't want to miss another moment of her life." Fiona studied his face, recalling the whirlwind of betrayal that had brought them to this juncture. "Henry, I want to believe you, but trust doesn't just snap back." He nodded, looking remorseful. "I understand. All I can do is try every day to show you I've changed." She turned her gaze to Grace, sleeping in her arms. The tiny heartbeat that pulsed in that fragile body was a testament to survival against impossible odds. She realized that she, too, carried a capacity for resilience she'd never known before. Whether or not Henry truly changed, she would always be able to stand on her own. For now, they existed in a cautious dance, each uncertain but hopeful that the near tragedy of Grace's birth might open a path to genuine reconciliation. In the months that followed, Henry strove to prove his commitment to both Fiona and Grace. He scaled back his office hours, delegated more tasks, and eased off the globe-trotting lifestyle. His focus pivoted from growth at all costs to ensuring the family's well-being. He even began attending therapy, acknowledging that his issues with control and fear of vulnerability had fueled many of his previous decisions. Fiona appreciated the shift, yet remained wary. She spent her days bonding with Grace and managing her own health, which, thanks to Dr. Brown's regimen, was slowly stabilizing. Each time Henry mentioned business deals or offshore accounts, anxiety fluttered through her. She wasn't naive about how quickly priorities could shift once daily pressures resumed. One evening, Henry surprised Fiona by inviting her to a small dinner at the penthouse. Dressed casually for the first time in ages, he prepared a modest pasta dish. Though it was slightly overcooked, Fiona was touched by the genuine effort. Over candlelight, he reached across the table. "I've terminated the offshore transfers," he said, his voice earnest, "and I dissolved that trust. Everything I was doing to protect my assets, I've undone it. Mark can verify. I want to make things right." Fiona's fork paused midway to her mouth. The revelation left her momentarily stunned. "You did?" He nodded, eyes reflecting sincerity. "I've seen what really matters. No more secrets, Fiona." Her chest constricted with a mixture of hope and caution. "It'll take me time to fully believe it," she admitted. He bowed his head. "I know. I'll wait as long as it takes." Still, life rarely grants smooth sailing. A few days later, a summons arrived at the penthouse from an investor who felt misled by Henry's earlier tech platform fiasco. They were suing for damages, claiming financial losses tied to Henry's alleged overpromises. The news rattled the household. Fiona, already anxious, worried how another crisis might pull Henry away. "This could drag on for years," he muttered, tossing the papers onto the coffee table. "I can't let it ruin everything we've built." Fiona felt a stab of fear. She recalled the Henry who would shut her out at the first sign of business trouble. Yet the new Henry surprised her. Rather than diving headlong into battle, he considered settling. "I hate paying them off," he admitted, "but it might be the best way to avoid a prolonged fight." In the end, Henry chose the settlement route, swallowing his pride for the sake of familial stability. The payout was significant, but it stemmed the tide of legal scrutiny. When all was finalized, Henry collapsed onto the living room sofa, emotionally spent. Fiona sat beside him, resting a hand on his. "Thank you," she said softly, "for putting us first." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting genuine regret and relief. "After almost losing you and Grace, I realized I can't measure my life by net worth alone." Fiona leaned her head on his shoulder. She remembered lying alone in a cold hospital bed, thinking Henry had abandoned her forever. The memory still hurt, but perhaps they had reached an inflection point. If his actions continued matching his words, maybe their family had a shot at real unity. Time brought steady healing to both Grace and Fiona. By the time Grace was 6 months old, she was hitting baby milestones, rolling over, babbling, reaching for toys. Fiona's autoimmune condition stabilized under Dr. Brown's vigilant eye, and her energy levels improved enough that she began revisiting some philanthropic ideas. The near-death ordeal had awakened a desire in Fiona to champion healthcare causes. She wanted to help other women facing high-risk pregnancies. Henry, seeing her passion rekindled, encouraged it wholeheartedly. Meanwhile, he wrestled with his own professional crossroads. After nearly losing everything, the unrelenting drive that once fueled him had dimmed. He quietly explored selling parts of his business, no longer enthralled by endless expansions. One late evening, after coaxing Grace back to sleep, Fiona discovered Henry in his home office, sifting through financial statements. Her chest tightened, recalling past deceptions. But this time Henry looked up with a weary smile. "I'm thinking of selling one of my subsidiaries," he admitted. "There's a good offer on the table, and I don't need to own everything. It might be time to focus on what really matters." Fiona stepped closer, heart pounding with cautious optimism. "Like what?" He shrugged, gesturing around the penthouse that had once symbolized his ambition. "You, Grace, a balanced life. Maybe using some of this fortune for genuine good. I don't have to be that cutthroat mogul anymore." Fiona studied him, seeing sincerity in his eyes. In that moment, she recalled the day she first saw him at a charity gala, drawn by his charm but hopeful about his philanthropic side. Perhaps this was the Henry she'd sensed all along, the one overshadowed by greed and fear. Weeks passed, and Henry finalized the sale of his subsidiary for a substantial sum. True to his word, he donated a portion to the children's hospital that had helped save Grace's life. Fiona stood beside him during the ceremonial check presentation, pride glowing in her chest. With looming business pressures eased, Henry immersed himself in fatherhood. He learned how to calm Grace's colic, how to make her giggle with silly faces, how to read her a bedtime story in soothing tones. Fiona, in turn, invested her rekindled energy into organizing a charity gala aimed at supporting mothers with complicated pregnancies, a cause close to her heart. Their relationship wasn't magically perfect. Trust once broken doesn't mend overnight. Yet every day, Henry and Fiona took small steps toward understanding and forgiving each other. They learned to communicate better, sometimes with the help of a marriage counselor. And with each shared laugh over Grace's antics, they inched closer to rekindling the love that once felt lost. Nearly a year after Grace's precarious birth, Fiona stood on a small stage in a grand ballroom for the survivors' charity gala. Lights glimmered off high ceilings, illuminating round tables set for donors and supporters. This event was deeply personal, embodying Fiona's journey from desperate hospital nights to triumphant new beginnings. Backstage, Henry cradled Grace, who gurgled happily in her ruffled dress. He watched Fiona approach the podium, remembering the timid volunteer he'd first encountered. Now she radiated quiet confidence, her story poised to inspire others. "Good evening," Fiona began, voice resonant in the hushed ballroom. "I stand here not just as a survivor, but as a mother who almost lost her life, bringing a child into this world. Tonight's gala is a celebration of resilience of every woman who has ever been told her pregnancy was too risky, her body too weak." Polite applause swelled, and Fiona continued, describing how the funds would benefit research and supportive programs for women facing high-risk pregnancies. Each word was infused with the authenticity of lived experience, drawing tears and admiration from the crowd. Henry, holding Grace, felt an unaccustomed swell of awe. The woman he'd hurt, the woman he'd nearly lost, stood poised and unbroken, channeling her pain into a cause that would help countless others. For the first time, he fully understood the depth of her strength and just how fortunate he was to be by her side. When the final auction items sold, the event organizer announced a record-breaking total. The crowd erupted in cheers. Some hurried to congratulate Fiona, while others praised Henry for matching donations. Cameras flashed, capturing their family in a moment of triumph. Yet, amid the applause, Henry had one more surprise. With Grace settled comfortably in his arms, he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Fiona's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a simple but elegant diamond ring, a symbol of renewal rather than old promises. "Fiona," Henry said, his voice trembling slightly, "I know I broke your trust in ways. Words alone can't repair, but I've spent every day of this past year trying to become a man worthy of you and Grace. Will you marry me again?" Her eyes brimmed with tears. The memory of hospital rooms, legal threats, and heartbreak still lingered, but so did the warmth of Henry's steady presence these past months. She glanced at Grace, who stared up at them with innocent wonder, and then back at Henry. "Yes," she whispered, voice quavering. "Yes, I'll marry you again." Applause thundered around them, guests moved by the raw display of devotion. Henry slipped the ring onto Fiona's finger, and they embraced, Grace giggling between them. It wasn't a perfect ending to a fairy tale. It was the start of a life built on second chances, a life more real and profound than any fleeting dream of riches. In the months that followed, Henry and Fiona renewed their vows in an intimate ceremony at the same botanical garden where he had first proposed. Surrounded by a handful of close friends and family, they promised to support each other through all storms, no longer blinded by unchecked ambition or hidden fears. Angela stood as Fiona's bridesmaid, while Mark Johnson, who had safeguarded Fiona's interests, officiated the ceremony, a reflection of how integral he'd become to their family's better future. With sincere effort and mutual respect, they forged ahead. Henry scaled back his once overwhelming empire, channeling funds into charitable projects dear to Fiona's heart. Grace thrived into a curious toddler, her laughter a fixture in their home. And Fiona herself emerged a force in the philanthropic world, using her story to champion healthcare reforms and maternal support programs. They had faced the brink of devastation, a marriage on life support, a child born prematurely, financial betrayals, and health crises. But through the crucible of adversity, they discovered what truly mattered: love, resilience, and the simple fact that life's greatest treasures can't be stored in offshore accounts. It's not a fairy tale with a neat ending. It's the ongoing story of two flawed people choosing to heal together every single day. New beginnings can bloom in the darkest seasons, and Fiona's remarkable journey proves just that. After all the betrayals, the heartbreak, and the life-threatening moments, she emerged stronger, securing her health, protecting her child, and even rebuilding her marriage on firmer ground. Her courage reminds us that resilience isn't about avoiding hardship, it's about facing it head-on and daring to rewrite the ending.
A quiet suburb, a neatly trimmed lawn, and a secret that threatened to split one family forever. It all began on a stormy night when Mark Anderson, seemingly the perfect husband, let his alluring mistress step into his pregnant wife's bedroom and into her bed. By the time dawn broke, flashing police lights flooded the driveway, and neighbors peered through windows in disbelief. No one could imagine how a once ordinary couple fell into such chaos. But within these walls lay hidden confessions, desperate betrayals, and heart-wrenching choices that would test loyalty, break trust, and leave everyone asking, how could it ever have come to this? Mark Anderson stared at the white picket fence in front of his modest suburban home on the outskirts of Denver, Colorado. The day was sunny, and a light breeze ruffled the neatly manicured lawn. He always took pride in appearances. He liked knowing everything was in its rightful place, reflecting an outward image of success and respectability. His wife Sarah often teased him about his perfectionist streak. In fact, it was one of the things she had found so endearing when they first met back in college. Their romance felt like a fairy tale in the beginning. Long strolls by the campus lake, late-night conversations about hopes and dreams, and shared laughter that echoed through dorm hallways. Mark was diligent, always rechecking his notes and color-coding everything in his backpack, while Sarah was more laid back, bringing a sense of warmth and spontaneity to his otherwise structured world. They graduated together, he with a degree in business administration, she in elementary education. Soon after, they were married on a crisp autumn afternoon, surrounded by family and a few close friends. It seemed they were destined for a happy life, ticking off all the boxes: stable jobs, a well-furnished home, and plans for children. Yet beneath the surface of this idyllic snapshot, a subtle tension had begun to settle in. As the years progressed, Mark found himself increasingly restless, obsessing over career goals, finances, and the desire for more excitement. Sarah noticed changes in him. Little things like how he lingered on his phone too often, or occasionally arrived home late with half-hearted excuses. She was patient, chalking it up to stress. After all, Mark had always been ambitious, and it made sense he might be feeling the pressure at work. When Sarah discovered she was pregnant, Mark's reaction was polite and supportive, though it lacked the unbridled enthusiasm she had expected. He hugged her, whispered reassuring words, but there was a distance in his eyes. Instead of celebrating, She found herself chasing him for each prenatal appointment, reminding him of the baby's progress. The more she tried to draw him in, the more he seemed to drift. She told herself it was a passing phase, that once the baby was born, Mark would realize the beautiful miracle they were about to share. But somewhere deep inside, Sarah felt a pang of worry, a whisper that warned her not all was right. Real trouble took root one evening when Sarah's best friend, Jessica Lee, visited for dinner. Jessica, a sharp-eyed, warm-hearted woman with a knack for reading people, discreetly pulled Sarah aside after noticing Mark's odd behavior. He was jumpy, his laughter forced, and his phone never left his sight. Jessica offered her concerns gently, but Sarah brushed them off, not wanting to believe that the man she'd built a life with might be hiding something. If anything, she blamed Mark's anxious state on the responsibilities piling up. But Mark was in fact drowning in secrets, ones that would threaten the very foundation of his marriage. He knew it, he felt it, yet he couldn't stop what was happening. That was the cruel irony of his situation. The very qualities that had once driven him to be the responsible, overachieving husband were now pushing him to take risks he never dreamed himself capable of. While Sarah napped early in the evenings or read baby manuals in her rocking chair, Mark was scrolling through messages that made his heart pound in anticipation. Messages from a woman who offered him a sense of thrill he hadn't felt in years. Her name was Carla Rodriguez, and she worked in the same office building as Mark, though in a different department. She was witty, confident, and possessed a magnetism that seemed to draw people in effortlessly. Everyone at the office talked about Carla's style, her flamboyant choice of bright pencil skirts, and the way she commanded attention during team presentations. Mark had seen her in passing, but only after being assigned to a joint project had they begun to speak. He'd noticed how she laughed at his jokes, how her eyes locked onto his when they conversed. Slowly their friendly exchanges morphed into stolen glances, then to flirtatious banter over coffee. Carla knew Mark was married. He never hid that. She even knew Sarah was pregnant. But from the moment Carla placed her hand on Mark's arm one evening during overtime, gently brushing against him, he found himself responding. He was at a precipice caught between guilt and a longing to escape from the monotony he blamed on domestic life. Carla, too, was escaping from something her own lonely nights and a string of failed relationships. They provided each other solace, a forbidden escape from their real lives. Their meetings were carefully orchestrated. Mark would fake a late work session or say he was meeting a client. Carla pretended she was staying behind to finish a report. They found dark corners in parking lots, eventually renting cheap motel rooms on the outskirts of town. Each time, Mark was sure guilt would consume him, but it never quite did lust, and adrenaline overshadowed everything. But the affair came at a cost. Mark's finances, once neatly balanced, began to suffer under secretive dinners and gifts for Carla. He found himself withdrawing from Sarah's bank account without telling her, always with the silent reassurance that he'd make it up later. He also neglected small household tasks. Sarah, now 6 months pregnant, found herself climbing step stools to change light bulbs and dragging groceries into the house alone. The tension between husband and wife continued to escalate. Sarah was frustrated and exhausted, but she tried to remain understanding. She never fully admitted to herself that Mark's distance might signify an affair. After all, he'd been loyal and devoted all the years she had known him. It was impossible, unthinkable, to consider he would betray her in such a way, especially now that they were expecting a child. Instead, she believed he was going through a personal crisis, perhaps a fear of fatherhood. Sarah confided in Jessica about her suspicions, and her desire to keep the marriage intact, no matter the challenges. Then Mark made a fateful choice one Friday night. While Sarah was away at her mother's house, he invited Carla to dinner at his own home. It was a step too far, and he knew it. But Carla had teased him, saying she wanted to see how he lived. That single curiosity overshadowed every warning bell in Mark's head. He assured himself it was just dinner, just a quick look at the house, and then she'd leave. But the moment Carla stepped through the door, wearing a midnight blue dress that clung to her figure, Mark knew they had crossed a line that could never be erased. Carla marveled at the photos on the mantel, wedding pictures, snapshots of Mark and Sarah at scenic spots around Colorado. Even the ultrasound image pinned on the refrigerator. Despite it all, Carla maintained an air of detachment, as though all these tokens of Mark's married life were mere props. Yet there was a glimmer in her eyes, something like envy. Perhaps a realization that Sarah's existence was painfully real and not just some story Mark told. But she said nothing, and Mark pretended not to notice the flicker of discomfort in his mistress's gaze. After dinner, Mark opened a bottle of wine. Carla drank, swirling the red liquid in her glass, leaning against the kitchen counter, with a playful grin. The tension in the air was palpable. Even Mark, consumed by his infatuation, felt the weight of what he was doing in that moment. If Sarah came home early, if a neighbor saw something, or if Jessica decided to drop by unannounced, everything would come crashing down. But Mark brushed aside the fear and let the night's temptations drown out any lingering decency he once had. By the time Carla left, it was nearly midnight, and Mark was too intoxicated to notice he'd left behind incriminating details. A wine-stained glass on the table, a faint whiff of Carla's perfume on the couch. He cleaned up most of it the next morning, but not everything could be erased. Sarah returned the next day to find Mark unusually jittery. He barely met her eyes when she mentioned her overnight trip, merely offering a distracted smile and a quick peck on her forehead before returning to his laptop. Not one to pry, Sarah decided to let him be. Over the next week, though, she noticed more oddities. A grocery receipt with items she hadn't purchased, a new brand of perfume lingering in the bathroom. Small tears in the living room curtains, as if someone had tugged them aside in haste. Her instincts told her something was off, but each time she tried to confront Mark, he feigned ignorance or brushed off her concerns as pregnancy hormones. Sarah, unwilling to ignite a confrontation, let it slide, though her intuition screamed that she needed to dig deeper. She wondered if she was being paranoid. Jessica urged her to keep her eyes open, but also encouraged her not to jump to conclusions. Sarah's mother, Linda, who was unaware of her son-in-law's changed behavior, simply advised Sarah to rest and not overthink. But the facade was growing thinner by the day. Mark's phone buzzed incessantly with messages he refused to open in Sarah's presence. He hid credit card bills and spent evenings out under vague explanations. Each lie stacked upon the next, forging a precarious tower that threatened to collapse with the slightest shift. By the 7th month of pregnancy, Sarah's frustration peaked. She confronted Mark one evening. When she asked him point blank if there was someone else, he scoffed, calling the very suggestion absurd. He even grew indignant, accusing Sarah of not trusting him after all these years. She apologized, tears stinging her eyes, and retreated to the bedroom with a knot of dread in her stomach. It was only after she heard him slamming cupboards in the kitchen that she realized how truly disconnected they had become. Meanwhile, Carla continued her pursuit of Mark, growing bolder. She sent messages at all hours, demanded more time together, and even hinted at wanting Mark to leave Sarah. Mark, torn between his unborn child and the lust he felt for Carla, found himself buried in stress. Some part of him, however dormant, still cared for Sarah. But he couldn't break off his entanglement with Carla either. He told himself he was trapped in a scenario with no easy escape. Each day felt like stepping on thin ice, hoping it wouldn't crack. That was how things stood when Sarah planned another trip to her mother's place. Linda was having minor surgery, and Sarah wanted to help for a couple of days. Mark recognized an opportunity. He promised Sarah he would manage the house and take care of everything. In reality, he was already anticipating Carla's company. He envisioned an evening free from prying neighbors or suspicious looks. This time it felt thrillingly dangerous. He made a mental note to hide all traces properly. But Mark failed to understand the nature of secrets. They breed bigger lies, deeper guilt, and an inevitable unraveling. And that unraveling was about to accelerate much faster than even Carla anticipated. Carla arrived on a rainy evening. Mark welcomed her with a hesitant smile, but she brushed his concern aside and draped her trench coat over the chair. They shared a meal that Mark had ordered and then settled in the living room. If there was any sense of guilt, Mark buried it beneath the facade of a charming host. Carla, for her part, seemed at ease. She wandered the house, studying family photos, with a critical eye lingering especially on the ultrasound image Sarah had pinned to a corkboard in the hallway. During dinner, Carla revealed a side Mark had rarely seen, a near-obsessive curiosity about his wife's life. She asked about Sarah's routines, her profession, her due date. Mark tried to respond, vaguely uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Carla's eyes sparkled with a strange intensity when she heard that Sarah was in her third trimester, as if calculating how to use this information for her own advantage. After dinner, Mark put away the plates and let Carla roam. She ended up in the master bedroom, admiring the pale blue walls and white curtains that Sarah had painstakingly chosen. The bed was neatly made, and a plush teddy bear, a gift from Sarah's friend Jessica, sat by the pillows. Carla ran her fingers along the comforter, a self-satisfied smirk tugging at her lips. "You're really living a double life, aren't you?" She teased, her tone somewhere between humor and contempt. A loving husband by day, a wild lover by night. Mark winced but mustered a forced grin. He closed the bedroom door behind him, as though trying to keep prying eyes away from the intimacy of this space. Standing next to Carla, he felt a wave of conflicting emotions: excitement, revulsion, guilt, and a strange relief that she was here at all. The evening unfolded slowly, each passing hour, an accumulation of unspoken tensions. Carla had carried an overnight bag with her, just in case, she'd said. Mark convinced himself she would leave before midnight, but as the clock approached 1 a.m., they were still tangled in conversation and half-empty wine glasses. The rainstorm outside battered the windows, making the prospect of driving home unappealing. Carla feigned helplessness. "I can't drive in this. Let me stay over." And with that, a line was crossed. Mark hesitated. Should he set her up in the guest room? Was that too blatant a sign of guilt? But Carla's cunning charm won. She tiptoed into the master bedroom, letting the overhead light cast shadows across her silhouette. Mark, helpless to resist, followed. Outside, the storm raged on, oblivious to the tempest brewing within these walls. Thus Carla ended up sleeping in Sarah's bed. The place where a pregnant wife should have found comfort and rest was now occupied by the woman who had seduced her husband. Mark tossed and turned throughout the night, haunted by the gravity of his betrayal. In fleeting moments of lucidity, he almost leaped out of bed to make Carla leave. But each time he tried, Carla would pull him back with a whisper or a touch, and the swirling mixture of fear and desire imprisoned him. A part of Mark believed he might still keep everything hidden, that come sunrise Carla would slip away, and he'd erase all traces. Sarah wouldn't be back for another day. He had time to wash the sheets, tidy up the wine glasses, and stash away Carla's belongings. But fate had other plans. Plans that neither Mark nor Carla could have predicted. The next morning, a watery sun struggled to pierce the storm clouds. Mark stirred early groggy and disoriented. Carla was curled up on Sarah's side of the bed, her hair splayed across the pillow. He stared at the ceiling, heart pounding at the thought of all that needed to be done, cleaning, changing sheets, ensuring no neighbor had spotted Carla's car. He tiptoed around the house, picking up her jacket from the living room sofa, gathering wine glasses and disposing of them in the outside trash bin. As he wrestled the trash can to the curb, Mark froze. At the far end of the block, a police cruiser crept around the bend, lights flashing, but sirens off. An immediate jolt of panic shot through his veins. Had something happened to Sarah? Did they come bearing tragic news? He looked around, scanning for any sign of an accident or trouble in the neighborhood. But the cruiser slowly rolled to a stop right in front of his driveway. Two uniformed officers stepped out, Officer Paige Morales and Officer Adam Thompson, both with stern expressions. Mark swallowed hard as they approached. This couldn't possibly be about Carla, right? They wouldn't have any reason to suspect infidelity. Unless Carla had a past Mark knew nothing about. The possibility flickered in his mind, sowing anxiety. He wiped his hands on his jeans, trying to maintain composure. "Good morning," Officer Morales said, tipping her head in greeting. "We received a report about a disturbance in this area early this morning. We're checking to ensure everything's okay." "A disturbance?" Mark repeated, his voice cracking. "Yes. A neighbor reported unusual noises, shouting. Maybe an argument late last night. They also saw a car parked out front that they didn't recognize." Mark's mind raced. His next-door neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, was known for her vigilance, especially at odd hours. Perhaps she had seen Carla arrive or heard them talking. He forced a polite smile. "I'm sorry to trouble you, officer. My wife is out of town, and I was just... Well, I might have had the television too loud last night. No arguments, though. Nothing else going on." Officer Thompson scrutinized Mark's expression. "Is there anyone else in the house with you right now?" "Mr. Anderson?" Mark felt a twist in his gut. A friend stayed over. She was caught in the storm, and..." Before he could finish, Carla emerged in the doorway, barefoot, wearing one of Sarah's robes. The color drained from Mark's face as the officers turned their attention to her. Carla's eyes flicked between them, trying to feign calm, but clearly unsettled by the unexpected arrival of law enforcement. "Good morning," she said, attempting a polite nod. Officer Morales studied Carla's attire, then exchanged a glance with her partner. "And you are..." Carla's response was quick, lacking the usual confidence. "Carla Rodriguez. I'm a colleague of Mark's. He was kind enough to let me crash here because of the storm." An awkward silence followed. The officers seemed unconvinced. Mark's posture stiffened, sweat beading on his forehead. Then Officer Thompson asked if they could step inside to talk further. Mark hesitated, fearing the officers might discover remnants of the affair, but refusing entry might look suspicious. Reluctantly, he led them into the living room, where Carla perched on the edge of the couch, hands clasped in her lap. The questions continued basic inquiries about the alleged disturbance, how Carla ended up here, whether Mark's wife was aware. Each query felt like a jab at Mark's fragile house of lies. He concocted half-truths, carefully sidestepping the real nature of Carla's presence. Meanwhile, Carla remained mostly silent, occasionally offering affirmations to Mark's statements. It seemed the officers weren't entirely convinced, but they had no concrete evidence of any crime. They reminded Mark and Carla to respect neighborhood noise ordinances and to be mindful of suspicious activity. Officer Morales handed Mark her card, suggesting he call if anything came up, her eyes lingering on him, as though warning she wasn't fully buying their story. Just when Mark thought they would leave, Carla's phone rang, blasting a shrill ring through the tense atmosphere. She scrambled to silence it, but Officer Thompson motioned for her to answer. Glancing at the caller ID, Carla paled. She stepped into the next room. Voice low. After the call, Carla re-emerged, looking shaken. Officer Thompson pressed, "Everything all right?" "Ms. Rodriguez." Carla forced a smile. "Just a family matter," she said, but her hands trembled as she tucked her phone away. Sensing the tension, Officer Morales decided to wrap up. She cast one final evaluating look over the scene, then pivoted toward the front door. The moment the officers left, Mark turned to Carla, ready to ask what was happening. But before he could open his mouth, Carla's phone chimed again. Another call. Carla stared at the screen and rejected it, exhaling shakily. "What's going on?" Mark demanded, heart still pounding from the near exposure of their affair. Carla brushed past him, grabbing her jacket and slipping into her shoes. "I have to go. I'm sorry, Mark. I'll explain later." And just like that, she was gone, leaving Mark alone in a house that now felt haunted by the shadows of betrayal and suspicion. Sarah would be home soon, and he had an endless list of cover-ups to manage. But a deeper dread gnawed at him. Carla was clearly entangled in something bigger than he'd ever imagined, and it was only a matter of time before it all caught up to them, before the next knock on the door wouldn't be as benign as a noise complaint. With Carla gone, Mark raced to erase every trace of her presence. He stripped the bed, replacing the sheets with fresh linen. He collected the empty wine bottle and glasses, tossed them in the recycling bin, and opened all the windows to air out the lingering perfume. He vacuumed the living room, wiped down counters, and even mopped the kitchen floor, desperately trying to rid the house of any memory of her. As he worked, his mind replayed the scene with the police officers. He couldn't shake the feeling that Officer Morales and Officer Thompson didn't entirely believe him. Their questions had probed deeper than a simple noise complaint. Yet what choice did Mark have but to lie? Telling the truth would mean forfeiting everything: his marriage, his home, his soon-to-be fatherhood. An hour later, Sarah called to let him know her mother was stable after the minor surgery, and that she'd be returning home by evening. Mark pretended everything was normal, forcing a light-hearted tone as he asked if she needed anything from the store. After he hung up, he crumpled onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. The pit of guilt in his stomach felt bottomless. Was it worth it, this double life, for a fleeting affair that offered excitement, but left him feeling hollow? By mid-afternoon, Mark couldn't ignore his anxiety about Carla. He texted her multiple times. Mark, 1:03 p.m. Are you okay? Mark, 1:10 p.m. Please let me know what's going on. Mark, 2:05 p.m. Carla. I'm worried. The police thing really shook me up. No response. The phone remained silent, each passing minute, feeding Mark's paranoia. He started recalling random details from their time together. Things she'd hinted at, questionable friends, financial troubles. a mention of an ex-boyfriend who was dangerous. He'd never pressed her for details, preferring their relationship remain an escape without real-world burdens. Now he regretted his willful ignorance. By 5 p.m., Mark heard the garage door open. Sarah was home. He hurriedly got up, plastering on a smile, as though he'd spent the day doing mundane chores. She walked in slowly, her baby bump prominent under a loose-fitting dress. She looked exhausted, but relieved to be home. Without a word, she set her bag down and let Mark wrap her in a hug. "How's Mum?" he asked softly. "She's fine," Sarah said. "The surgery went well and she's recovering. I just need some rest." Together they made a simple dinner, Mark fussing over Sarah, trying to be attentive to her needs. She seemed grateful, but also distant, as though sensing something was amiss. As they ate, Sarah looked at him with eyes that flickered between love and suspicion. "Mark, was everything okay here the last couple of days?" "You seem tense," she ventured. He took a sip of water to stall. "Just work stuff," he lied. "Some deadlines?" She nodded and let the subject drop. Mark exhaled. For one brief moment, he believed he might still salvage things if Carla would stay away, if the police never returned, if he could bury this chapter of his life forever. But secrets have a way of resurfacing in the most brutal fashion, and that reckoning was closer than Mark realized. Late that night, while Sarah slept fitfully, her pregnancy making it hard to find a comfortable position, Mark lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The events of the last 24 hours churned in his mind. He reached for his phone on the nightstand, desperately checking if Carla had finally texted him. Nothing. His anxiety climbed. In the dim glow of his bedside lamp, Mark scrolled through social media. He searched Carla's name, rummaging through any clues that might explain her sudden panic. He found her profile inactive, last updated weeks ago. As he scrolled further, he stumbled upon a post from a friend of Carla's referencing a certain mess Carla was in. There were no details, just cryptic comments and concerned replies. Unease prickled through him. He decided to do what he should have done from the beginning, look up Carla Rodriguez in public records. Accessing an online search, he discovered a few results indicating minor legal issues in her past. A DUI charge from years ago, a civil dispute over unpaid rent. Nothing that jumped out as immediately dangerous. Yet Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something heavier was in play. He slept fitfully, waking at dawn to Sarah's gentle stirring. She pressed a hand to her belly and turned to him, blinking in the early morning light. For a moment, they smiled at each other, a brief slice of normalcy. Mark tried to cling to that moment, to pretend they were still the couple who had once laughed on the campus lake. But the outside world wouldn't allow it. As Sarah headed to the shower, Mark's phone buzzed an unknown number. He swallowed hard and answered. "Mark." A voice whispered urgently. "Carla." "Thank God. Where have you been?" Mark scurried out of bed and closed the bedroom door behind him. "I can't talk long," Carla said, her voice hoarse. "I'm in trouble, Mark. I owe money to some people. Dangerous people. The police showed up because they were tipped off about something. It's not about us. Not exactly. But if they connect any dots..." Her voice trailed off. Mark felt his stomach churn. "Carla, what exactly did you do?" A pause. "It's complicated. I made some bad decisions. Now I need a place to stay, just for a few nights. My landlord kicked me out. I have nowhere else to go." Mark braced himself against the wall. No, Carla. "You can't come here." "My wife, I have no one else to ask." She pleaded, her tone verging on desperation. "Please, I'll be discreet. I'll stay out of sight. I promise." He closed his eyes, the guilt mixing with dread. Sarah was in her final months of pregnancy, and the last thing he wanted was to endanger her or cause more stress. But Carla's frantic plea tugged at him. In some twisted sense, he felt responsible for her predicament, as if his affair had pushed her to the brink. "Let me think," he muttered finally. "I'll call you back." He ended the call and slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. The drama spiraled further out of control, and with each passing moment, Mark dug himself deeper into a pit of moral compromise. That morning, Sarah left for a routine prenatal checkup. She invited Mark to come along, but he claimed he had an important virtual meeting for work. Guilt gnawed at him as he watched her drive away alone, all while he contemplated how to handle his mistress's precarious situation. He called Carla back and arranged to meet her at a nearby diner, a rundown place that rarely attracted attention. When he arrived, he found her in a corner booth wearing a hoodie, sunglasses perched on her head, her face drawn and tired. She looked up at him with a mixture of relief and shame. "Thank you for meeting me," she murmured. Mark slid into the booth, grimacing at the sticky tabletop. "Tell me what's going on." Carla recounted her story in fragments. She owed a large sum to a local loan shark connected to her ex, and they'd threatened her. She had tried to pay them back, but fell behind. The previous night, she'd gotten a tip that the police had been contacted, perhaps to bring her in for questioning. She believed the noise complaint was a ruse, an attempt to locate her. Mark's head spun. This was more than a simple affair gone awry. Carla was ensnared in a criminal web, and he was now on the periphery of it. "You can't stay at my house," he repeated firmly. "It's too risky. Sarah would kill me." Carla's eyes glistened. "I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm desperate. Just a few nights. I can keep a low profile. If anyone asks, say I'm a friend from work, going through a breakup." Mark thought of Sarah's growing suspicion, the near miss with the police, the unborn child who needed a stable home. Every logical fiber in his being screamed at him to cut Carla off. Yet he felt a twisted sense of responsibility. He'd let Carla into his life. He'd ignored every red flag. Now she was pleading for help, and part of him couldn't bear to leave her in danger. Against all better judgment, he agreed to house her in the guest room for a single night. Carla's eyes brightened with gratitude. Mark cursed himself silently, knowing he was only tightening the noose around his neck. That evening, Mark lied to Sarah again. He said a colleague was in town for business and needed a place to crash for the night. Sarah, although surprised, did not protest. She was preoccupied with back pains and a baby that kicked relentlessly. Besides, Mark had rarely brought colleagues home, so she assumed it was a genuine favor. Carla arrived late, wearing a cap and oversized clothes to avoid recognition. Mark ushered her into the guest room, quickly praying the neighbors wouldn't notice. Sarah was in bed reading a pregnancy book. Mark told her he'd be up soon, then crept to the guest room where Carla lingered by the door. "You have to stay in here," he hissed. "Do not step out unless it's absolutely necessary. Sarah can't see you. She'll recognize you from the police visit." Carla nodded, her eyes downcast. "I understand. Thank you, Mark." He closed the door and returned to the master bedroom. Nerves frayed. Sarah was yawning, complaining of back pain. Mark sat beside her, gently massaging her lower spine, in an attempt to soothe her. The moment felt painfully ironic. Here he was tending to his pregnant wife while his mistress hid in the next room. Every stroke of his hand reminded him how far he'd fallen. That night, Sarah drifted off after some time, but Mark couldn't sleep. He heard every squeak of the floorboards, every rustle of movement from Carla's room. Around midnight, a text arrived on his phone. "I'm so sorry for all this. Carla." He stared at the message, feeling a twinge of pity. After a moment's thought, he tapped out a response. "Just stay put. We'll sort this out tomorrow." Morning dawned bright and tense. Sarah rose early to prepare for a follow-up doctor's appointment. Mark feigned a headache, offering to stay behind just in case his colleague needed help. Sarah seemed unconvinced, suspicion flickering in her gaze, but she gathered her belongings and left anyway. With Sarah gone, Mark hurried to Carla's room, only to find her asleep in a rumpled bed, eyes puffy from crying. He woke her gently, offering coffee. She told him she'd be out of his hair by afternoon, having made some arrangements to lay low at a friend's house. Mark felt relief wash over him. If Carla left for good, he might salvage some semblance of normalcy. But just as Carla was preparing to slip out, a frantic knocking rattled the front door. Mark's heart lodged in his throat. Not again. He peeked out a window. Officer Morales stood on the porch, hand poised to knock again. Turning, he found Carla in the hallway. Terror etched across her face. "Go to the kitchen," he commanded under his breath. "Hide." As Carla disappeared, Mark inhaled sharply and opened the door, forcing a calm smile. "Officer Morales, what brings you here?" She looked at him with a stony expression, stepping forward, prompting him to let her inside. "I need to ask you a few more questions about Carla Rodriguez." Mark's blood ran cold. "Carla, I told you we worked together, and she stayed over because of the storm." Officer Morales nodded slowly. "We have information suggesting Ms. Rodriguez may be involved in illegal activities. There's a possibility she might contact you again, given your relationship. We'd like your cooperation." Swallowing hard, Mark feigned ignorance. "Look, I don't know what Carla's done. I've barely spoken to her since the other day. She hasn't contacted me." The officer gave a half smile that didn't reach her eyes. "If you hear from her, you'll let us know immediately, right?" "Of course," Mark said, managing a nod. Officer Morales seemed unconvinced, but left her card again, instructing him to call if Carla showed up. As she walked out, she let her gaze linger in the foyer, as though sensing someone else's presence. Mark held his breath until she finally exited. Heart racing, he rushed back to the kitchen where Carla was crouched behind the island, eyes wide. "She's on to us," he muttered. "You need to go, right now." Carla stood, her face grim. She slung her bag over her shoulder. "I'll call a taxi." Neither said a word as they hurried to the back door. Carla paused momentarily, turning to Mark with tears brimming. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for all of this. I never wanted to hurt you." Mark nodded, unable to find words. Then, without further ceremony, Carla rushed out the back, disappearing into the alley. Mark closed the door, exhaling a shaky breath. He could almost taste freedom, an escape from the swirling nightmare, if he could manage to keep the police at bay and Sarah unaware. But his relief was premature. For even as Carla vanished from sight, a car pulled into the driveway. Sarah was home early, carrying a bag of groceries. She spotted him at the back door, eyes narrowing with confusion. "Why are you standing there like that?" she asked, stepping into the kitchen. Who was just here? Mark's stomach twisted in knots. He searched for an excuse, stumbling over words. Nobody. I was just getting some air. Sarah glanced around suspiciously. Why are you so jumpy, Mark? He forced a smile that crumbled under Sarah's penetrating stare. Her gaze flicked to the back alley, the slight disarray of the kitchen, the traces of a second coffee mug on the counter. She wasn't naive. She knew him too well. And in that charged silence, Mark felt the final threads of his deceit unraveling. The confrontation Mark had dreaded finally erupted. Sarah demanded answers. Who was staying in the guest room? Why did she find a woman's hairbrush in the bathroom? Why was the police officer here? Each question hammered Mark's fragile composure. At first, he attempted to spin more lies, but Sarah's teary gaze and trembling voice shattered his defenses. Something in him finally broke. He confessed haltingly at first, then in a rush of words he couldn't control. He admitted to the affair, Carla's overnight stays, the police involvement. The only part he censored was Carla's criminal entanglements. He simply told Sarah that Carla was in trouble and the police had come around to question them. Sarah, stunned into silence, gripped the countertop as if to steady herself. Her face went pale and her lips parted in disbelief. She said nothing for a long moment, then asked the question that terrified him. Did you let her sleep? In our bed? In the bed where I've been sleeping while carrying your child? Mark wanted to lie, but the weight of his sins was too great. He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. The noise that escaped Sarah's throat sounded like a wounded animal, a strangled cry of agony. She turned away, pressing a hand to her swollen belly as tears streamed down her cheeks. You brought her into our home, into my bed. What kind of monster are you? She spat, voice thick with revulsion. He reached out, but she recoiled. Sarah, I'm sorry, he whispered, but he couldn't find words to justify the unforgivable. Without warning, Sarah's emotions surged, and she slammed her hand against the cupboard. The baby inside her kicked violently, as though sensing her turmoil. Trembling. Sarah stumbled to the living room, sinking onto the couch. Mark followed, guilt etched on his face, but she held up a hand. Stay away, she said. Her voice choked. I need to think. I need to understand how I married someone who could do this to me. He stood there, helpless, wanting nothing more than to console her to undo every wrong decision. But the damage was done. There was no comfort he could offer that would mend the gaping wound in her chest. It was in the midst of this tense standoff that another knock came at the door. 3 hard, distinct raps that echoed through the silent house. Mark closed his eyes, dreading what might come next. Sarah sat upright, alarmed, her tear-streaked face turning toward the tumult entrance. When Mark opened the door, Officer Morales and Officer Thompson stood there again, expressions grave. This time they weren't alone. A plain-clothes detective accompanied them, a badge clipped to his belt. Mark's heart dropped. Mr. Anderson, the detective said, voice clipped. May we come in? Mark stepped aside, mind spinning. Sarah, rising from the couch, locked eyes with him, fear and betrayal mingling on her face. The detective introduced himself as Detective James Carter. We've been investigating certain criminal activities involving Carla Rodriguez, Carter stated, flipping open a small notebook. We have reason to believe she's been using associates, willing or otherwise, to conceal her whereabouts and possibly launder money. We have reason to believe you might have information. Mark's hands shook. I I only knew she was in some sort of trouble. She said she owed money. That's all. Detective Carter nodded. She's wanted for questioning related to fraud and conspiracy. We believe she's been leveraging personal relationships to hide assets. Are you aware of any large sums of money being transferred through your accounts, Mr. Anderson? The question hit Mark like a blow to the gut. Instantly, he recalled the times he'd covered Carla's expenses, the secret transfers. At the time, he thought it was just gifts or petty cash. Had she used him for something bigger? No. Mark lied weakly, his voice faltering. I mean, I gave her money for personal emergencies, but not large sums. The detective studied Mark's face. Ms. Rodriguez was reported at this address yesterday. We have statements from a neighbor that a woman matching her description entered your home late at night. Is that correct? Sarah's eyes turned accusatory. She glared at Mark, arms folded protectively over her belly. Mark caught between fear of legal repercussions and shame before his wife nodded slowly. She was here, but she left. Detective Carter flicked through his notes, then addressed Sarah directly. Mrs. Anderson, were you aware that Ms. Rodriguez spent time in your home? Sarah's expression tightened, tears brimming again. I only just found out. She managed her voice laced with bitterness. Carter frowned, turning back to Mark. We'll be checking your financial records. If we find any evidence that you assisted Ms. Rodriguez in illegal activities, you'll be charged as an accomplice. Terror seized Mark. This was far worse than a mere affair exposed. He could face criminal charges. In a panic, he exclaimed, I had no idea. She told me she was in trouble, but I didn't know about any illegal schemes. I was just trying to help. The detective let silence reign for a moment, before nodding to Officer Morales and Officer Thompson. Let's go, he said, handing Mark his card. If Ms. Rodriguez contacts you, call immediately, or there will be consequences. As they left, Sarah sank back onto the couch, trembling. Mark stood in the foyer, the detective's card clutched in his shaking hand. The reality of his actions closed in on him like a suffocating fog. He had betrayed his wife, endangered their child, and now potentially implicated himself in a criminal case. His once perfect life was in ruins, and he had only himself to blame. After the police left, silence descended in the living room. Sarah turned to Mark, tears shimmering in her eyes. He tried to approach, to place a reassuring hand on her shoulder, but she jerked away. I can't do this, Mark, she said. Voice hollow. You lied to me. You let her into our home. You risked our baby's safety. He felt the sting of her words, but any defense he tried to muster sounded weak. He could only say, I'm sorry so many times before it meant nothing. Sarah cradled her belly. I need space. I need to think about how we're going to move forward, if we even can. He wanted to beg for forgiveness, to promise he'd rectify everything. But how could he? The scars were too deep. Sarah rose shakily, gathering her purse and keys. Where are you going? Mark asked, panic welling up in him. To Jessica's, Sarah replied, I need someone I can trust right now. Mark nodded, knowing he had no right to stop her. He watched as she left the door, clicking softly behind her, a symbol of the distance that had grown between them. Alone in the quiet house, Mark felt a wave of despair crash over him. Everything was unraveling, and he wasn't sure there was enough thread left to stitch his life back together. Days passed. Sarah remained with Jessica, avoiding Mark's calls, except for brief updates about her pregnancy. She needed to check in with her doctor regularly, and Mark was sick with worry about her stress levels. He texted her, apologies poured out his remorse in long messages, but rarely received more than a one-word reply. Meanwhile, the police made good on their promise to investigate Mark's finances. They subpoenaed his bank statements and credit card records. He had to retain a lawyer, a tired, middle-aged man named Leonard Price, who took Mark's frantic calls at all hours. Price assured Mark that unless they found direct evidence of large-scale fraud, he'd likely avoid severe charges. But the possibility of an arrest loomed, overshadowing every waking moment. Carla, for her part, vanished entirely. Mark heard nothing from her, no texts, no calls. He told the police he hadn't seen her, which was the truth. She had disappeared without a trace. Detective Carter stopped by once more, questioning Mark about specific transactions. Mark tried to explain they were gifts or petty loans, but Carter remained skeptical. Jessica occasionally messaged Mark in Sarah's stead, telling him to stay away until further notice. She informed him that Sarah was safe, but deeply distressed, her blood pressure rising dangerously due to the emotional turmoil. Hearing that Mark felt crippling guilt. He had pledged to love and protect Sarah, and yet he was the one jeopardizing her health and possibly their child's. A week later, the phone rang. Mark answered automatically, half hoping it was Sarah. Instead, Carla's voice crackled on the other end. "Mark, I'm so sorry," she said, sounding frazzled. "I heard the police are looking for me. I can't run forever. I've decided to turn myself in." He sank into a chair, relief and dread warring within him. "That's probably the best thing," he said. "They think I helped you launder money or something. You have to clear this up." She sighed. "I will. Look, I used your accounts to park some funds temporarily. I never meant to drag you down. I just needed a place to hide it. My ex threatened me if I didn't get him the money." Mark's jaw clenched. "Carla, you had no right." "I know," she interrupted. "I've made a mess. I'm going to explain everything to the police, tell them you weren't involved. You deserve that much." Anger flared in Mark, but he also recognized this might be his lifeline, the only way to avoid charges. "Just make sure you do the right thing." Her voice trembled. "I will. I truly did care for you, Mark, in my own selfish way." Before he could respond, she hung up, leaving Mark in stunned silence. He called his lawyer immediately, who advised him to wait for Carla's statement and remain cooperative. That night, Mark received another call, this time from Detective Carter. Carla had turned herself in, and she had indeed explained that Mark was clueless about the fraudulent aspect of her finances. The detective's tone was neutral, but Mark sensed a hint of relief. "You're free from suspicion for now, Mr. Anderson," Carter said. "But we'll verify her statement. If there's any discrepancy, we'll be in touch." When Mark ended the call, he exhaled a long breath of relief. The nightmare might finally be nearing an end, at least on the criminal side. But the personal damage remained gaping and raw. With Carla's arrest and her confession clearing Mark of wrongdoing, the legal nightmare finally eased. Now all Mark could focus on was repairing what truly mattered: his marriage. He reached out to Sarah repeatedly through messages and letters, begging for a chance to talk. After encouragement from Jessica, Sarah agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe. Mark arrived early, nervous and remorseful. When Sarah walked in, she looked tired but strong. They sat in silence for a moment before Mark spoke. "I know I can't undo what I did," he said. voice trembling. "But please let me prove I've changed." Sarah's eyes welled with tears. "You risked everything for what you let her into our home, into our bed." Mark reached for her hand, but she pulled back slightly. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight," he said. "Just the chance to be a good father, to be better." "I need time," Sarah whispered. "I have to think about what's best for the baby." Mark nodded. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a beginning. There was still pain between them, but there was also a door left ajar, just wide enough for the possibility of redemption. Mark moved into a small apartment, giving Sarah space while she stayed home preparing for the baby. He began therapy and parenting classes, determined to change. Jessica helped coordinate visits, and Sarah let Mark attend doctor appointments. At the ultrasound, they saw their daughter's face. Mark cried, overwhelmed. Sarah remained distant, but acknowledged his efforts. She appreciated his support, even if trust hadn't returned. Hints from Jessica suggested Sarah hadn't given up entirely. Still, the wounds ran deep. For now, they focused on the baby, unsure of what the future held, but both still holding on just a little. When Sarah went into early labor, she called Mark in panic. He rushed her to the hospital and never left her side. For 3 tense days he stayed by her bed, helping however he could. As Sarah rested, Mark silently vowed to earn back her trust. One night, she stirred and whispered, "I hate what you did, but I see you're trying." Mark held her hand gently. "I'll do whatever it takes." Her eyes softened. "We'll see." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was hope. And for Mark, that was everything. Back home, on bed rest, Sarah allowed Mark to help during the day, though he returned to his studio apartment at night. Their conversations grew more civil, focused on Emily's future. One afternoon, Sarah suggested counseling, not to save the marriage yet, but to learn how to co-parent. Mark agreed eagerly. Sessions with Dr. Christine Lee were raw and painful. Sarah voiced her heartbreak. Mark confronted his fears and guilt. It wasn't healing overnight, but it was a beginning. Each meeting chipped away at their distance, offering a small, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, something could be rebuilt. At 9 months pregnant, Sarah went into labor. Mark was at her side through every contraction, with Jessica offering support. After hours of pain and anticipation, their daughter arrived, a healthy girl with a strong cry and a head full of dark hair. As Mark cradled Emily, Grace Anderson, tears streamed down his face. For a fleeting moment past, betrayals faded beneath the miracle of her birth. Sarah watched silently, eyes full of conflicting emotions. In that fragile peace, they shared an unspoken understanding. Mark devoted himself to fatherhood, staying up through night feedings, changing diapers, and caring for Sarah during recovery. Though still cautious, Sarah allowed him back into the home, but not her heart, not fully. The counselor advised they take things slow and focus on Emily's well-being. Carla's case concluded with her conviction. Mark was officially cleared, but the damage to his marriage endured. It took nearly a year of therapy and honest effort before Sarah was willing to try again. She laid out clear rules, complete transparency, shared accounts, no more secrets. Mark agreed without hesitation. They weren't the same couple as before, but in their brokenness, they found a way forward, anchored by love for their child and a hard-won trust. Roamed hope found its way back. Thank you for joining me on this roller coaster tale of betrayal, heartbreak, and the strenuous journey toward redemption. Life can twist us in unexpected ways, testing bonds and pushing us to the very edge of what we believe is possible. In Mark and Sarah's story, we're reminded that no matter how dark the night becomes, there's always a chance, however slim, for forgiveness, if we're willing to face our own failings and fight to make things right. Perhaps their story resonates with you, or someone you know, urging us all to recognize the fragility of trust and the power of second chances.